On August 21st, 2009, a young mother wanted a night out. 21-year-old Rose Marie Bly had 2 children under the age of 2. Rose stayed home with the kids while her husband, whom she had just married in February of that year, worked. Rose told her husband that she was going to go visit her cousin, who lived near their home in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin. But Rose never made it. Her case received a fair amount of local attention, but not a lot of clues. So eventually it faded from the public consciousness. That is, until 12 years later when her family was facing another tragedy. The disappearance of her niece, Summer Wells. When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell you the stories of those who never came home. Today, I want to tell you the story of Rose Marie Bly. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back.
Thank you for joining us once again. So I saw, you looked at me a little bit because last week we brought you the story of Summer Wells.
Yeah.
And this week we are covering the case of her aunt, who is also missing, Rose Marie Bly.
Who went missing 12 years previous to Summer going missing. That's crazy.
Yeah, so Rose is Candace, Summer's mom, is her sister, her younger sister.
Why didn't that come up in the last episode?
Because, I hadn't researched it yet, and I didn't know a whole lot about it other than the fact that, once Summer's case was really gaining a lot of attention, people were digging into the family and digging into their past. And then, somebody found out about Rose. And so now it's just kind of this thing that's thrown out there when people talk about Summer's case. So I actually just decided to, leave it out of that episode completely with the idea that I wanted to actually look into it and make it its own episode and tell her story.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Obviously, anybody that goes missing deserves, a spotlight so that their name and information gets out there. But with the cases tied so closely together, same family,
mm-hmm.
There's got to be overlapping suspects, or unless the local PD just didn't think that was suspicious. The 2 people in the same family.
They definitely did. I mean, I don't know, what the police in Tennessee really think about it, but once Summer went missing, so this takes place in Polk County, Wisconsin. The investigators there did make a statement, and they're like, "Listen, we're aware of what's happening down in Tennessee."
So they were at least tangentially involved.
Yeah, for sure. And since then, I mean, they have come out and said that they have no reason to believe that the cases are linked. Yeah.
I don't believe in coincidences. That is way too close for me.
Yeah, well, and we can talk about that toward the end once we tell her story, because I do have an opinion on this, but I don't really want to get into it yet.
Sure. Suspense for the listeners.
Yeah, but I mean, if you haven't listened to our last episode, which was on Summer Wells, you probably should have listened to that. Well, I mean, actually, I don't know if it matters if you listen to it first or second, but either way.
Or maybe listen to this first and then go back.
Yeah, because it's chronological, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, because there are, some overlapping people. I won't say overlapping suspects, but there are people that show up in both.
Yeah, it's the same family. So
exactly. It's very, very interesting. But before we get into all of this, we have some new Patreon members to shout out.
Yay, so I feel like we haven't done this in a while.
I know. It's, I feel kind of bad because like anytime I do a 2-parter, we get an influx of Patreon subscribers because they can get the part 2 right away instead of waiting a week.
So I see what you're doing.
I know. I really don't do it because of that, but it is. Like, it does happen. So, I don't know. Anyway.
It's the hook.
I know. I'm sorry, guys. So, thank you very much to Hope, Heather P., Katrina A., Mandy, Mindy W., Kelsey, and Aaron O. I think all ladies. I mean, listen, I'm not trying to be presumptuous. Like, I don't know how any of you identify, but your support means the world to us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody.
I know a lot of you, you're like, okay, just get to the freaking story. But before we do, I really want just to take another moment to mention one of our very first listeners and my friend, Susan Bohort. Okay. I just wrote this up and I thought it was going to be all right. All right. Okay. So we're going to try to get through this. I met Susan my senior year of college when I was working as a production assistant at WHSV, which was the local ABC affiliate in my college town. Susan was the co-anchor of the morning show, which is, the show I worked on because I was a very cool kid in college. I woke up at 4:15 every single weekday and went to work at this weird, small market news show, and went to bed at 8:30 every night. Anyway, so, I only worked there for that 1 year and then I graduated and, kind of moved on, got a job. But I stayed in the area and we kept in touch. She ended up getting a bigger and better job in Roanoke. It's a bigger market. And randomly, a couple years later, my job actually transferred me down there. And I knew exactly 0 people in Roanoke, but Susan took me under her wing and basically gave me a social life there. I would not have ever left my apartment basically, except to go to work if it weren't for her. I only lived in Roanoke for a year and then I ended up moving on and, but, we kept in touch and over the years, she would always read my dumb shit on the internet, the stupid blog that I started in 2007 or whatever. She would read the TV recaps that I, would write when I actually started getting paid to write. And she would always comment and send me messages and stuff. And when we started this podcast, she was one of our very first listeners and, would tell me how much she really loved it. And on July 8th of this year, Susan passed away. She had been battling ovarian cancer. She actually beat it twice. And, but unfortunately, she did pass away a few weeks ago. It was 3 days before her 47th birthday. Susan was completely goofy, hilarious. She made friends everywhere she went. And, she was so funny. She actually went viral years ago. I mean, I feel like when people just started going viral, when that started to become a thing, and she ended up on Anderson Cooper's show on CNN. And it's always been one of my favorite videos. And I think I share it almost every year on Facebook. So I want to share it with you. I'm going to link it in our show notes. So, after you listen to this episode, or before, if you just want something happy before we get into this upsetting case, just watch it. It'll absolutely brighten your day. It brightens my day every time I watch it, every time I see her and hear her laugh. So anyway, I just wanted to take just a quick moment and introduce you to my friend. So thank you for bearing with me through that, for indulging me. But now let's talk about this week's story, the story of Rose Marie Bly. Rose Marie Bly was born in Grantsburg, Wisconsin on September 16th, 1987 to Candace Harrer and Kenneth Bly. Kenneth actually usually went by the name Jim, which his middle name was James. I know, it's Jim is not short for Kenneth. So anyway, Jim had 2 children prior to his marriage to Candace. a daughter named Kathleen, and a son named Kenneth. Jim married his first wife in 1958, and they divorced in 1972 on grounds of cruelty. The couple had lived in Connecticut, but Jim eventually made his way to Galveston, Texas, and that's where he met Candace Harrer. Now, Candace is Summer Wells's grandma. And if you recall from Summer's story, she was there that day, and she and Candace, Summer's mom, and Candace were all planting flowers shortly before her disappearance.
All right, so we've got Ken Jim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then his son Ken.
Yeah.
And then we have Candace and her daughter Candace.
Yeah, no, so the funny thing is that, so yes, Kenneth and his son Kenneth, he has the daughter named Kathleen. His first wife's name is Kathleen.
Oh God!
And then
I need a chart. I know. I can't see it.
Okay, so the first two kids, Jim's first two kids, don't come into this, so we don't need to worry about them.
Ken Jim.
Yeah, Ken Jim. But yeah, so after that first marriage, Ken Jim met Candace. Now he was significantly older than Candace by about 26 years.
Yikes!
Yeah,
26.
Yeah. The two married in Galveston, Texas in 1981 when Kenneth was 45 and Candace was just 19.
Ugh. You and I both became parents at 27.
Yeah.
Ew.
I know. The couple had 3 daughters, starting with Candace. So Summer's mom, Candace, is the oldest daughter. And she was born 11 months after they got married. And that's the thing. So originally I was like, oh, Candace, it must have been like a shotgun wedding, but it doesn't appear that that was the case. So Candace was followed by Jeannie and Rose, whom he called Rosie. The family was still in Texas when Candace was born, but at some point they ended up moving to Grantsburg, Wisconsin. I don't have a lot of information about their marriage, but, there have been rumors, actually, interestingly, that Candace, like Grandma Candace, was abusive toward him. But I don't know. That's just literally internet rumor. It is not based on police reports or anything like that. In any case, they did divorce when the 3 girls were in high school, which was basically like, sometime in the early to mid 90s is what it sounds like. Allegedly, Candace actually left Jim for a woman and didn't have any contact with any of her children for several years. I couldn't find a record of their divorce for some reason. I found the record of his first divorce. Couldn't find a record of this divorce, but I did find a record of Candace living in Las Vegas in 1996. So I'm guessing that's, kind of what happened and where she took off to for a while.
So this is Grandma.
Grandma, yeah.
From Summer Wells.
Right.
Okay.
So the 3 girls stayed in Grantsburg with their father, and Rose attended Grantsburg High School, where she navigated being a teenager without her mother. Now, I'm not sure about Jeannie, but it sounds like Candace, who was about 5 years older than Rose, left home not too long after she graduated high school. She moved around the country and actually was a carny for a while, which what? I didn't know. I actually learned that through this case. She literally traveled with the carnival.
Doing what?
I don't know. I mean,
was she like a sideshow or
no, operating rides? I mean,
I don't know. You say a carny, then my first thought is what was she the fucking hairy woman, the wolf? I mean,
this was
wolf
in
girl or
the
something?
90s, not the 1890s. What are you talking about?
I mean, hey, look, the 90s was a weird fucking time.
I mean, it was, but not like that. Before Candace moved away, though, she actually, and I mentioned this in the Summer Wells episode, she had 2 children, and this is before she met Don Wells. And she was in Wisconsin at the time, and Rose would babysit for the kids while Rose was in high school still. And apparently it was a bad situation. I talked about how, she lost custody of those kids. And Rose actually called CPS on her sister at one point.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't have any details. I don't know if it was because of abuse or neglect or why she called CPS, but yeah, that was apparently something that, that did happen. But by, the time Rose got out of high school, Candace had moved away and wasn't in the area any longer.
It still illustrates, the cycle of violence and just cycles in general of behavior that clearly was, a part of this family.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. And that's what really becomes clear once you learn more about this story and you kind of put it with Summer's story, is that there is a lot of, yes, generational cycles, generational trauma, patterns that are repeating themselves. While she was in high school, Rose met a guy, and he was older than her by about 4 years. So he was already out of school.
It's less than 26.
Yeah, exactly. And, they had mutual friends, though. So that's kind of how they met. And they got serious pretty quickly. I mean, to the point where when she first graduated school, Rose actually went and lived with his dad. So her boyfriend, Christopher Larson, because he was older and everything, he had already moved out of the house and was sharing an apartment with friends. So he was living there. And when Rose graduated, so she loved horses. Rose is a horse person. She has loved horses her entire life. And Chris's dad had horses. And so she actually moved in with him and took care of his horses for him. But not too long after graduation, Rose became pregnant. And once that happened, Chris moved out of the apartment that he was sharing with friends and moved into his dad's house with Rose. So basically, they just lived there together as they, waited for the birth of their first child.
And she was, 18 at this point?
Probably 19, I think. Yeah. Now, after their first daughter was born, Rose actually got pregnant again almost immediately. Almost like it's nearly not physically possible to be pregnant any closer than she was. So they ended up having 2 daughters less than a year apart.
They fell into that whole myth that if you're, what is it? If you're breastfeeding,
you can't get pregnant. Yeah. When Rose disappeared, her kids were 19 and 9 months old. Rose dove headfirst into being a mom. She loved her kids. She loved being a mother. That was just something she had always just wanted in her life. But, the life in general wasn't the fairy tale that she had probably dreamed of.
Did it mirror the life that she grew up in?
It actually might have. Kind of. Yeah. And I mean, listen, I don't think it's too shocking to believe that 2 young people who had 2 children in less than, in a year, and she's right out of high school, they had a rocky relationship. I don't think that's the most shocking thing.
No. Yeah.
Regardless of their backgrounds.
Right.
But the nature of the rocky relationship differs based on who you ask,
Okay.
Rose's best friend at the time has said that Christopher was controlling and that it was his demand that she stay home with the children instead of her choice. She also accused Christopher of not letting Rose leave the house to see friends or family, though leaving the house to see friends or family is literally what she was doing the night that she disappeared.
Right.
So again, these are just what people are saying. So even though they were having problems, nobody disagrees with that statement, they did seemingly want to make it work. And in February of 2009, they were married. So this is after both of the kids were born. But, they just decide to get married. Unfortunately, things only seemed to get worse from there. And shortly after their wedding, the couple's relationship also allegedly became physical. Christopher told police that she slapped him while she accused her husband of putting her in a chokehold and slamming her to the ground. Now, this all happened in June of 2009. So just like I said, a couple months after they got married, and the police were called out to the home. During this incident, though, only Rose was arrested.
That's interesting.
Yeah. She initially had a bench warrant out on her for misdemeanor disorderly conduct, but it was later amended to a domestic abuse. In July of 2009, just 1 month before she went missing, Rose went to court and pleaded not guilty to the charge. However, she never had a chance to resolve the case fully. There have been accusations from, some people in Rose's life that Chris was abusive toward her. But the only police records are this, where she's the one who got arrested.
And you said she slapped him? Is that?
Yeah.
So I wonder if they arrested her because that was the only physical evidence of assault.
Yeah, I mean,
if we are to believe both sides,
right,
a chokehold wouldn't necessarily display any bruising.
Yeah.
Versus a slap could potentially, I guess it depends on how hard the slap is or whatever.
Yeah.
There's potential for bruising or some sort of actual physical evidence, whereas a chokehold, there might not be physical evidence. I don't know. We weren't there. Who knows?
Right. But, back to your question of is the pattern of how she grew up, is that repeating herself? I mean, like I said, there were the rumors that her mother was violent toward her father. Right. So perhaps they were. I don't know. Now, around that same time, and from what I understand stemming from this incident, Christopher allegedly filed for divorce. And I only say allegedly because though this has been widely reported, I couldn't find the court records that confirmed it. However, there was another court record from that time, a request for a paternity test. On June 4th, 2009, there was a filing for, quote, findings of facts/conclusions of law with judgment of paternity, end quote. This was for one of their daughters, though I'm not sure which one, if it was the older one or the younger one.
They were so close.
Yeah.
I would hope it would be the first one, if, because,
yeah, right.
Because, who's stepping out, 2 days after having a kid?
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm not passing judgment here or anything, but, holy shit.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, in any case, the paternity question was only for one of the children. And, the records show that there were a few related affidavits later that month, but then nothing in July. And then on August 6th, 2009, there was a motion in order for dismissal due to the fact that, quote, parties have reconciled and are again residing together, end quote.
So continuing the cycle of potentially abusive, not healthy relationships.
Right, exactly. And, so I'm guessing that's why, I couldn't find the divorce filing because it clearly never went through, although this didn't go through either and this was there. But in any case, there were breakups and makeups and paternity questions, and it was just not a good scene all around.
Well, as somebody who has filed for divorce several times, of course, this depends on jurisdiction. And
And we don't know anything about Wisconsin.
Right, but typically, so first steps in that process are not always filing for divorce. It's filing a separation agreement, which is not something that you'd be able to necessarily find as far as public record.
Okay, so do you think that maybe that's why the paternity test thing was there and not the divorce. So like maybe they wanted to establish paternity prior to filing for divorce because that would affect like custody and other.
It would affect everything in the separation agreement.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
so maybe that
explains.
Yeah. So maybe he didn't actually file for divorce.
Yeah, but that's what everybody what everybody says.
Right.
Like, okay, if you're filing a separation agreement, it's the ultimate goal is divorce.
Right.
But that's typically the first step in filing for divorce. Now, at least in my experience in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. So,
dear Lord.
Hey, if I had my law degree, I'd be peddling my divorce attorney experience here. But
so many missed opportunities. So not much is known about the weeks in between this dismissal on August 6th and Rose's disappearance on August 21st, but her mother, Candace, did give a little bit of insight in an interview. According to her, on August 19th, 2 days before she went missing, Rose called her. She told Candace that she had actually fallen off a horse a few days prior to that. And like I said, Rose was a huge horse person and, falls happen sometimes even if you're good at riding.
Right.
But Rose was complaining of lingering headaches. And so Candace told her to go see a doctor, like you would, right? But
there's potential for a concussion there
if she's still having headaches, days later. I mean, that's not a great sign. But, of course, she gave her the ultimate blow-off answer of, I'll think about it. And it doesn't appear that she ever did go to the doctor. So there is a possibility that Rose had an untreated concussion or other head injury at the time of her disappearance. And again, not confirmed. We don't know, but I think it's important to just at least kind of throw that out there.
Sure.
August 21st, 2009 was a Friday. And that afternoon, Rose and Christopher went to the mall with their girls to buy new cell phones. They both got new phones, and when they got home, she switched out her SIM card. So she put her old SIM card into the new phone so that everything transferred over from her old phone. On their way home, they picked up fast food and, ate it once they got there. After dinner, she said that she was going to go to nearby Cushing, Wisconsin to see her cousin and go do karaoke. Rose and Christopher lived in St. Croix Falls, and Cushing was only like 4 or 5 miles away. The young mom wanted to go out and relax and, have a few drinks and just hang out with her cousin. So around 7:30 p.m., she drove off and Christopher just went along with his evening.
Did she take her new cell phone?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the old one too, I believe. Or maybe it was like in the car or something along those lines.
Sure.
At some point that night, some reports say around 9, Rose called Chris to check in, and she told him that she'd be home around midnight. Everything seemed good, and Christopher eventually fell asleep.
Okay, so wait. So she called Chris later?
Yeah, like after she left.
So did she make it anywhere?
Well, he assumed so. I mean, like she didn't say that she hadn't.
Well, no, yeah, I know that, but you said she was going to go hang out with her cousin.
Right.
Did the cousin see her?
Well, yeah, I'm getting to that.
Okay. I'm trying to establish a timeline.
I know, honey. She calls it around 9 or so and says like, listen, I'm going to be home around midnight. Seems cool. He goes to sleep, wakes up the next morning, no Rose. And, he was surprised, but again, not panicked or anything because like maybe she had a little too much to drink. Maybe she stayed the night at her cousin's house, like there are a billion reasonable explanations as to why she wasn't home. So, but, he called her obviously and she didn't pick up. And so he, started calling around, like called the cousin and, called her sister who lived, not Candace, her other sister, Jeannie, who, lived in a nearby town and, asked to see if anyone knew where she was. But no one did. As the hours went on, he began to grow more concerned when he still couldn't get in touch with her and she still wasn't home. And he eventually, called Jeannie to come and help him look for her. So Jeannie and her husband, who I don't know if they're married at the time, but in any case, they came over. The husband stayed with the kids, and then Chris and Jeannie went out. They went to, Rose's friend's parents' house and, called her friend who, I guess he didn't know where they lived, but he knew where her parents were. It was like her friend from high school, just stuff like that. They were just trying everybody in Rose's life, basically. Couldn't find her. Whether this is true or not, Chris believed that he had to wait 24 hours before he was able to report her missing. And so, apparently he waited until exactly 24 hours and called the police. So she was last seen Friday evening. She's officially reported missing Saturday evening.
Okay, but who actually saw her? Who was the last person that saw her? The cousin?
No. The last person who officially saw her was Chris. Because, and I don't know if Chris found this out from the cousin or if police found this out from the cousin, but she said that she had never made plans with Rose that night. So the question is, did Rose lie to Chris about where she was going?
Or was this all being reported from Chris to the police as far as the timeline of events?
Yes. So at this point, all of this is coming from Chris. The cousin's like, no, we never had plans. So again, we don't know if Rose lied to Chris about where she was going or if Chris is lying to the police and everybody else about what Rose told him.
So do we have any evidence of them actually going to the mall that night and picking up those cell phones?
Yes.
I understand there's 2 cell phones involved with her, but
right.
Did it actually happen that night?
That afternoon.
That afternoon.
Yes, it did. So there is mall surveillance footage that does show them going and buying these phones. So, and then I assume, that's backed up by financial records and things like that.
Sure, but that's the last actual sighting of her, was that afternoon.
From what I understand, yes.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's video evidence or anything about the fast food trip that was between the mall and the house. I don't know one way or the other about that. But
no,
I
good
do
call,
know
but that's close enough.
That's close enough, exactly, yeah.
So we're talking about more than 24 hours since she's been officially seen by anybody else
outside of the house, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct. Now, this cousin has not been publicly named, but I do want to say that it is not the cousin that has come up in various social media posts who is married to a registered sex offender. So basically, I know. That's the thing with this family is they do have a different cousin who is married to a sex offender, and that man, the sex offender, at one time, apparently prior to Summer being born, actually lived in Tennessee with Dawn and Candace. People are trying, we're really making that connection because it started, people just started posting as fact that was the cousin, his wife was the cousin that she was supposed to be meeting that night.
Right.
But the family has come out multiple times and said, no, not that cousin. They were not in Wisconsin at the time. They had nothing to do with any of this. But the cousin, the cousin that Rose was, supposedly supposed to be meeting that night, did allegedly say that Rose had asked her to lie for her in the past and say that they were together on nights when they were not.
Mm.
But she said that was not one of those nights. That's what she told police, that Rose has asked her to do that before, but not that night. She had no idea. And so basically, and the story is Rose had used this cousin as a cover before, but the cousin wasn't really completely on board with doing that. And so her response to Rose is basically well, you better hope that Chris doesn't call me because I really don't want to lie to him about this. So she knew that Rose was telling Chris that she was with her but like she wasn't telling Chris that, you know what I mean?
Did the cousin ever come forward and say that Chris found out about that?
No, I have not heard that. I mean, he did for sure after the disappearance.
Yes,
but,
after the disappearance,
but no.
But before that.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Because apparently he never called, like any of those nights where she was like, hey, I need you to cover for me. Like Chris never called to check up on her. So like it just never came up.
Okay, so that's important though.
Yeah.
Because that establishes a pattern of behavior on her part.
Exactly.
And if Chris never actually found out that that was like a thing, then it's fair to say that he probably believed that she was going over to her cousin's that night.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. It's interesting, right?
Do you see?
No, I do, and I
See
mean,
where I'm going with that, though.
I do,
because like if Chris knew that was like a bullshit cover,
right,
for her doing something else,
right,
then he could have very easily spun that if he was the one that did something to her. But if he never knew that until later, then it's fair to assume that he legitimately thought she was going over to her cousin's.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, again, you know, the friend did talk about how controlling he was and everything. But like, if he were so controlling, you know, you would think that he would have called the cousin some of these other times to check up on her, you know?
Yeah. I mean, maybe he was controlling in other ways.
Yeah. I mean that's very true. That's very true.
Who knows? Who knows what she meant by he was controlling?
Right. Rose was rumored to have been having an affair around this time. Like, according to the cousin, Rose had a boyfriend. So the cousin knew about this. She was like kind of this unwilling participant in this whole thing, but she didn't know much about it. But she said that Rose never told her who the person was, who she was seeing. So I don't know if police ever verified, or if they were ever able to verify that Rose was having an affair. And then if they did, I don't know if they were ever able to find out with whom or interview that person. So that's like this other possible person that's just kind of hanging out there. And I don't know one way or the other. So police did continue to interview people in Rose's life, but, you know, they didn't really come up with anything. They, of course, checked cell phone records and everything. And I will say that early on, Chris's story about her calling and saying like, I'm going to be out, I'll be back at midnight, was corroborated by phone records. Obviously not the content of the call.
Right.
But the call itself.
The call itself.
So the call itself did come in.
Some length of time. It wasn't just like a call and hang up.
Exactly. But 5 days after her disappearance, police did make a major discovery. On August 26th, Rose's car was discovered abandoned in a parking lot in Grantsburg. Now, if you remember from the beginning of the episode, Grantsburg is where Rose grew up, and it's about 30 miles from St. Croix Falls, where she lived. Now, the parking lot is weird. It's been described in like a bunch of articles as a place where truckers sometimes park their like 18-wheelers when they're not working. But it just looks like a normal parking lot. Like it's near a post office and a laundromat. So, I mean, it's not some big truck stop looking place or anything. It just literally looks like a parking lot in the middle of town. So police searched the car, but nothing appeared out of the ordinary. The keys were gone. So it seems as though somebody drove it there, parked, and then left as normal. There was like no signs of violence or, you know, damage to the car itself, nothing like that.
What was found inside the car?
Nothing interesting.
So, no cell phones.
Nope.
Nothing.
None of her. Yeah.
None of her immediate belongings.
Nope. Now they gathered hair and fingerprints from the car, you know, but nothing has really come of it so far. The fingerprints all came back to Rose and her immediate family, like anybody who you would expect.
Would have had access to
exactly.
The car.
So it wasn't wiped down, basically. So the DNA, though, that they were able to gather, apparently was a very small amount, and it's never been matched to anyone.
Did they say like what type of DNA was
I think
collected?
It was hair. Like, I think they gathered hairs.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, if it's her car, there's going to be, her hair is going to be in it.
For sure. But I think there were other hairs that they weren't able to match with anyone. But again, it's a car. Like, how many random people, So it could mean something. It could not.
Right.
But again, with a case, that's like the sum total of the physical evidence, But interestingly, and I actually didn't read this in a lot of the initial reports, but apparently the front seat of the car was also pushed all the way back when they found it. Rose is only 5 feet tall.
Yeah, there we go.
And Chris is only a few inches taller than she is. So neither one of them would have been able to drive with the seat pushed back that far.
So we're thinking the other potential boyfriend.
Yeah, or anybody else,
And given the proximity to where she grew up,
I'm
wondering if the boyfriend was somebody that she knew when she was in high school.
Yeah, I do find that interesting that it was found in her hometown.
You said it was 30 miles from where she lived, right?
Yeah.
And it's close to her hometown. I mean, again, I don't believe in coincidence.
Yeah, like her mom still lived there and she worked there. And interestingly, that parking lot is a place that her mom, Candace, passed by every day on her way to work. And she says, she told this to a newspaper, that she had driven by that parking lot just 2 hours before she got the call that her daughter's car was found there. And she said that she did not see that car in that parking lot. So she believes the fact that the case had been starting to get more attention. So because, by this time she had been missing for 5 days, it was starting to get some local news coverage. She and her friend, also named Rose, had been passing out flyers like everywhere. Police had actually done a helicopter search, but around her house. So like it was really starting to ramp up. So she believes that kind of attention and pressure led somebody to move it from wherever it had been for the past 5 days and drop it off in that parking lot to be found.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I mean, she does not for a second believe that car had been there since the 21st. Now, of course, a lot of people suspected Rose's husband, Christopher, of being involved in her disappearance.
Sure.
They had a rocky marriage that was publicly known.
Right.
And, it's always the husband. So
yeah, absolutely.
Police obviously interviewed him. He was given a polygraph, which he passed. And police did publicly say that like he always made himself available to them. And he seemed to be very upfront and, acted as basically non-suspiciously as he could in that situation, I guess. The police chief at the time said that he passed the polygraph, like told reporters he passed the polygraph and they ruled him out as a suspect. Now, there have been several police chiefs in the intervening 13 years, and the official position of the Polk County Sheriff's Office now is that nobody has been ruled out. Sure. Because, she hasn't been found. You can't really rule anybody out.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, you can put somebody lower on the priority list of potential suspects.
Yeah. And it does appear that, he did get, he got knocked down a few pegs, I guess, on the suspect list.
Well, so if he's cooperative, I would assume that they searched their house. They obviously searched the car because they've found it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if there's no evidence in the house of anything, if there's no evidence in the car of any blood or physical violence or whatever,
right?
You also have to take into consideration they had 2 little kids. Obviously, you can't interview them as witnesses,
right? Because the oldest one was again like 19 months old,
right? But those are dependent children. Those are like very dependent, on parents. So like if dad was murdering mom and then somehow disposed of the body, like all of that's going to take time while you have these infants at the house. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
do you strap them in the car seat and take them with you?
Yeah, right.
What are the logistics of this?
Yeah. Yeah. That's my point.
Right.
Like, it's not like, oh, you've got a 5-year-old who you can put to bed, or a 6-year-old or whatever, and, they're asleep and you don't have to necessarily like stress about them.
Right.
You're talking about 2 babies.
Yeah.
Who
19 months and 9 months.
Yeah. Who are going to wake up like a lot throughout the night. So it's not like you've got a whole lot of free time to do these things.
Right.
Now, of course, I understand. Yes, you can still do this and neglect the kids, whatever. But it adds a little bit of complication there that might make it more difficult for him to actually commit these crimes.
Logistically.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point.
Because then it's not even just committing the act, it's also cleaning up after yourself.
Right, cleaning up and, like you said, disposing of the body in a way in which she hasn't been found in 13 years.
Yes.
Yeah. The police seemingly thought that he probably was not involved in this. But his actions a few weeks later made some people suspect him even more. Just about 3 weeks after Rose went missing, Christopher went back to court and filed for divorce. He also petitioned the court for full custody of their daughters.
I mean, that's a little odd. I'm not sure why he would petition the court to get full custody, given that there was no previous to him initiating the divorce proceedings. There was no divorce proceedings, so he's their father. Like, he has custody.
Well, no, that's a good question. That's the question that a lot of people had. They're like, all right, this is weird. To them, like, this was proof that he didn't care about her and that, like, maybe he orchestrated her disappearance in order to get the children or something like that. But according to Christopher's attorney, the reason that he moved so quickly, and again, this is actually what his attorney advised him to do, because Chris believed that Rose had run off on her own.
Well, the story that is being pushed forward here, it looks that way.
Right, exactly. And so he thought she ran off. And I don't know if by this point, 3 weeks later, he had found out about this boyfriend.
Yeah, potentially.
There's a good chance that he had, And so if he finds out that his wife had this boyfriend, she's missing, her car is found, but her keys and her stuff, you know what I mean? So, like, in his mind, he's like, she took off. And what he didn't want to do, what he did not want, is he didn't want her showing back up and taking the kids. Because you're right, there weren't divorce proceedings before that. So if she did show back up, she could take the kids because she's their mom. It's not parental kidnapping when there isn't a custody agreement in place. Like, she could just take them.
Yeah. So he's, if he has an attorney at this point, which is the smart thing to do, because, at one point he was a suspect. So it would be smart to lawyer up. But
I don't even know if this is like a criminal attorney. I think he might just be a divorce attorney.
Yeah. Well, one way or the other.
Yeah.
That's a smart move.
Well, yeah. And so the court did grant him temporary full custody. But if Rose did come back, she could have gone to court and contested it. Sure. And then it would have switched over to a normal divorce/custody situation, right? So all that did was it protected him and his kids from her coming back and taking the kids legally.
Yeah.
Legally,
because she could still
physically do it, obviously.
Right.
But yeah, it was just to put that protection in place. And, from his perspective, if he's genuinely thinking that she just ran off with some guy, you're going to file for divorce.
Yeah, no. And honestly, that entire line of thinking is actually really smart. And it's not often seen from that perspective, like the flipped perspective of a man doing this to, hold on to his kids or whatever. It's typically the other way around.
Yeah.
Yes, and I know that's very stereotypical or whatever. I get it, but it isn't. It isn't normally seen that way. So while some people might say that's suspicious, it's not. It legally protects him to have the rights to his kids. So now that's in place. He has at least a temporary full-time custody order put in place. So now if she does show back up and takes the kids, then that is parental kidnapping.
Exactly.
And then she could get arrested for that.
Yeah.
On top
he
of
has legal recourse.
Right.
But the headline is missing woman's husband files for divorce.
Yeah, of course.
You
yes,
know?
because that's the fucking thing that people are going to
and so when you just look at that, it's like, okay, well, that's suspicious.
And yes, if you read the headline without the context,
well, of course,
yes.
but that's what people do. We read headlines. We don't read articles. Damn.
But like, I'm on his side at this point. Like, if we are to believe the way this played out,
mm-hmm.
and then he finds out later that she had a boyfriend, and like all the signs are pointing to she just rolled out with this dude.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, absolutely. Do whatever you need to do to protect your kids so that you can hang on to them.
Yeah. And, so Christopher didn't really do a lot of talking to the press around this time.
Good.
Which is smart.
Sorry. I know there's judgment all over the place as far as the amount of talking to the press and all that. No.
Well, no, but I mean, we talked about that in Summer's case,
you're going to get judged
no matter what.
Yeah. And I hate the media, so like I would never talk to the press.
Yeah. Apparently one reporter did get a hold of him by phone around this time, and he just said, quote, "I hope she's okay, and I hope she gets a hold of somebody," end quote.
Clearly he doesn't believe that she's dead or anything.
No, at this point, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So whatever everyone thought about his quick divorce, like there wasn't any evidence that a crime had even occurred, much less that Christopher had been the perpetrator. Though as the investigation went on, police did begin to suspect that foul play was involved. Like I said, they were interviewing everybody in her life, and they were all saying, they're like, listen, yeah, the marriage had problems. Like, yeah, maybe she did have this boyfriend or whatever, but they're like, there's no way in hell she ever would have left her kids. Like, that is just not something she would have done. Like, she had that done to her. She was much older than her children, but her mom did run off when she was like in high school and not have contact with the family for a couple of years. I'm sure she wouldn't want to do that to her children. And from what everybody says, that just was not the type of person she was. And in fact, a big reason why she, was trying to make the marriage work is because she was afraid that if they did split, that Christopher would try to get custody.
Okay. Well, I see all those arguments. You're also dealing with somebody who just had 2 kids within 19 months of each other?
Within 10, they were 10 months apart.
Okay, so imagine the postpartum.
Yes. That is another point to bring up, because apparently Rose had dealt with depression issues in general at times. And while it has not been confirmed that she did suffer from postpartum depression at this point, I mean, you can imagine.
Yeah, come on.
That absolutely could have been a factor in whatever was happening.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not singling that out or whatever, but it is certainly something to consider.
Right. It's just another thing that you have to look at, right? Just like, I brought up the potential head injury, because so initially, like Candace talked to reporters a lot when Rose went missing. And one of her initial theories, like at the very beginning of this, was that she thought that Rose did have a concussion and like was maybe disoriented and wandered away, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think she wandered away, but I think that could have also contributed to it.
Yeah.
So you have somebody that potentially is going through postpartum depression, who then has, again, this is all potentially has a concussion. I mean, maybe has a boyfriend. I mean, there's all kinds of things. Is not in the healthiest relationship.
Right.
There's all of these things playing into it. It could be that she just wanted out.
But So in addition to people just saying she wasn't that type of person, she was like a cash person. So she didn't really use like credit cards or anything like that. But she apparently had very little cash on her at the time. She also didn't take any of her clothes. She left her laptop behind, like she just left behind the things that you would think you would take if you were going to start a new life. Okay. I know.
How many cases have we gone through where people are allegedly left to start a new life and they literally left everything?
Right.
At least she took her phone and her purse.
Yeah, I mean, that's true.
And who knows? Who knows what the boyfriend had? Maybe he had money.
Yeah, I don't know. So when police pulled her phone records, they also didn't find anything in the days leading up to her disappearance that seemed out of the ordinary. So nothing that would indicate that like there was planning going on or, anything like that. Her phone was also never used after the night that she went missing. The Polk County Sheriff's Office continued to investigate, but when they kept coming up empty-handed, they sent the entire case file to the FBI. Their missing persons division basically retraced, Polk County steps, but really didn't find anything that they had missed. Eventually, the Wisconsin Department of Criminal Investigation also got involved in the case, but they didn't really come up with anything new either. And that's what's so nuts about this case. Like, there's really no more information than that nearly 13 years later. No other physical evidence has ever been located. I mean, there have been random sightings of her over the years, but, nothing that's ever been substantiated. And 1 year after she went missing, Polk County Sheriff Tim Moore told WXCE, quote, "There are no witnesses, very little information. Quite frankly, we were told by the FBI that they were surprised to see how many man hours we had poured into this investigation because there is no crime at this point. We still maintain that we need to be prepared if there is a crime," end quote.
Well, okay, good on him.
Yeah.
Like, we don't often praise police on this show, but like, yeah, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good perspective to have. You have a missing person and there is no crime that has actually occurred that you have evidence of, but to keep it on the forefront and to look at it as though a potential crime may have occurred, like that is.
Yeah. So you're actually like gathering the evidence and
so that's not only
talking to people.
Only a progressive way of thinking, but it's also like realizing that, a missing persons case doesn't, at this point, once the initial investigation is done, is not actually pulling any man hours away from you. So you're not doing what Baltimore does, where they say it's shelved.
Right. Or Chicago is the other one.
Yeah, Chicago was like, what did they say? It was like
inactive.
Inactive.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah.
like it. In order for it to be an active case, it just needs to be assigned to somebody.
Yeah.
So, like, it doesn't take any resources away to just have it, on somebody's desk.
Right.
So I'm good on that sheriff.
Yeah. And, so interestingly, though, again, I mentioned that friend of Candace's, who is also named Rose. She has really been the only one that I've seen who's been publicly critical of the sheriff's department because she believes that Christopher did have something to do with it. She thinks that they haven't gone after him hard enough. But I mean, just based on like what we know, I mean, you can kind of see why they didn't really go after him harder, Yeah.
And I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, until she's found, until the story is completely, known, you can't rule him out as a suspect.
Yeah.
But if you've already searched the house, if you've already searched the car, if you've potentially geolocated the cell phone calls, triangulated the cell phone calls, if the evidence isn't there, the evidence isn't there.
Yeah. Yeah. They also, and yeah, I actually didn't mention this. So, where the car was found, they also, checked the surrounding surveillance cameras. Interestingly, no cameras caught the car getting to that parking lot, but apparently there were a couple ways to get there that weren't covered by cameras. So they did check that. They apparently went door to door in the area around the parking lot, and there was a small lake nearby that they drained.
Wow. So they really...
Yeah.
That's pretty extensive.
Yeah. I mean, as extensive as you can get with no evidence,
Yeah. I mean, for all we know, she left.
Yeah.
But
it doesn't seem likely, especially now, given that it's been 13 years.
Sure.
But yeah. 2019 marked the 10-year anniversary of Rose's disappearance, and Polk County Sheriff Brent Walk held a press conference to help republicize her case. And again, this is the new sheriff. I've named like 3 different sheriffs, but all of them have treated this case with importance. Sheriff Walk said, quote, "I don't really like the name cold case, as I think it implies we have pushed it off to the side, and as law enforcement, we never give up. We never quit searching for the answers." End quote. The sheriff's office also produced like a really nice video. Like they hired a very professional company to do this, that they shared with the media and on their social media pages in order to basically restart the conversation around Rose and her case. We'll post it on our blog. And Sheriff Walk said, quote, "Our hope is that we can stimulate some talk in the social media avenue as well as just get our message out to the community that we are still looking for answers in the mystery of the disappearance of Rose Marie Bly." End quote.
Again, fantastic.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so she went missing in 2009. Like, yes, social media was a thing, but not nearly to the extent that it is now. Yeah. So... That's great police work. I mean,
Yeah,
we don't often say it, but like,
I know.
Wow, like getting that out now, even now, and just like keeping her in the social media presence and having that thought to push that out as a 13-year-old case.
Yeah,
like that's great.
Yeah, exactly. And so all of this happened in 2019, before Summer's disappearance. So like it had nothing to do with the publicity that happened because of that. Like this is just something that they were doing on their own, because it was 10 years at that point and they weren't any closer to finding answers. So, the only real evidence in this case that we have is that DNA, which has been run through CODIS several times with no results. And so now police are hoping that someone who knows something will come forward. Maybe somebody who knew who Rose was seeing at the time, if she was, seeing somebody. Maybe someone who saw her with a man who wasn't her husband, which actually somebody did give a tip. I saw that in a Facebook group a couple of years. Actually, no, it was in 2010. It was like the year after she went missing. Somebody did say like, hey, I saw her in a McDonald's drive-thru in a car with a man who wasn't her husband, and that ended up getting pushed to investigators, So they're looking for things like that. Maybe somebody who saw her car between the time she left the house and when it was found 5 days later in that parking lot 30 miles away, They just need somebody to either come forward with something they've been holding back, or for somebody just have their memory jogged, who wasn't necessarily aware that they had information that might be important to this case. So, going back to Christopher real quick, what I will say is when I first looked into this case, right? Like, you always automatically think it's the husband. Then, when I'm gathering the news articles and stuff, you see that he filed for divorce three weeks later, and, that he like never really talked to reporters. And it's just like, okay, red flag, red flag. But he has stayed involved. There was a Facebook group that was started for her in 2010, in early 2010. So like not too long after she disappeared. And, he was a member of it and he commented, and people would say terrible things to him and accuse him of stuff. And he's still around. Like I was watching a YouTube interview with somebody connected to the case, on some YouTube show, and he showed up in the chat, like he's around. He is still involved. He doesn't really talk a lot publicly about it. Like he doesn't want to be interviewed, by any of these things or anything like that. But and he is around, he is paying attention, mainly because he wants to make sure that his kids are kind of left out of the whole thing. Chris stayed in St. Croix Falls. He didn't leave. He, obviously had custody of the kids. He maintained custody of his girls, and he's been raising them for the past 13 years as a single father. He hasn't remarried. He might even still be in the same house, if not in the same house, in the same town. And apparently from, what other family members have said, the girls are doing great. They're like 13, 14 now, and just normal teenagers, basically. He's stayed put, and he's just been doing that this whole time. Just to wrap up and talk a little bit about Rose and Summer. We talked in the Summer Walls episode again about how people on the internet were going like crazy over her parents, over Dawn and Candace, and their past and their like potential drug use and police records and, all of this stuff. Like I said, Candace had 2 kids. She lost custody of them. Dawn had at least one other child he also lost custody of. Then they had these 4 kids. Summer goes missing. The 3 boys get taken away. Right. So, it's basically a shit show. Then, we learn about Candace's family. We learn about how her mom ran off and, how her mom was potentially abusive. We learn that Candace's sister Rose called CPS on her when Rose was just a teenager. Their cousins married to a convicted sex offender, and that sex offender lived in the house in Tennessee. Grandma Candace's brother is also a convicted sex offender. So people have been like, okay, well, where was Dawn when Rose went missing? And it's like, they were living in Arkansas. Like, I don't think he ever met Rose. People are like, where was the uncle? Like, he was locked up. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. They are really trying.
They're reaching.
Yeah. Really trying to find ways in which these 2 cases are connected. And I don't think that they are. But what I do think is that with the generational, like we were talking about, the generational trauma, the generational abuse, that if you're talking about victimology, the people in this family just tend to end up being at a higher risk.
Yes.
To become victims.
Yes.
Of a crime.
Yes.
So I don't think that they're related in that. I don't think that the same person took both of these people.
No.
Or anything like that. But they're related in that, again,
they're related in the fact that, so the cycle is, the common terminology everybody thinks of cycles as cycle of violence, but it's way beyond that.
Right.
And this is the cycle of being in a situation. So you tend to gravitate towards situations or relationships that are familiar to you. So if you're familiar with a relationship that is volatile, is potentially abusive, it has all of those red flags and the markers that you just mentioned, that was your life, that becomes your life, and then it's just like you said, it exposes you to the potential for not a missing persons per se.
No, but to be a victim of some sort of crime.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I just feel like they were probably a little bit more vulnerable than maybe the average population,
right? And that's the key. They were more vulnerable. We are not blaming them.
No, God, no.
But they are more vulnerable to those situations and scenarios because of their familiarity with those situations.
For instance, like regardless of who was potentially abusing who in Rose's marriage, it was a volatile relationship that does sound like it was abusive in some way, right? So
one way or the other.
It was
ways,
abusive, right?
Who knows?
Exactly. Yeah. So she's in this abusive relationship, this volatile relationship. So it would stand to reason that there's a good chance that maybe if she did have a boyfriend, that it was also a volatile relationship, that it was also potentially an abusive relationship. And because we don't know who this guy is or anything about him, maybe it turned into something worse.
Yeah. We don't know.
You know? And whereas, so you've got that, and again, the victimology making you just more vulnerable to something like that. You know, that's kind of the case in Rose's story. With Summer, it's obviously not her because she's 5,
but it's her family,
right? And so with Dawn and Candace, especially with Candace, there's this long-standing history of drugs. There's this history of, you know, hanging around shady people. There's drug dealers and, you know, sex offenders and people like this coming in and out of the house. So it's opening Summer up and, you know, making her more vulnerable to somebody coming in and doing something to her, right? Because we talked about, you know, if she was taken from the basement, it has to have been somebody who is known to the family.
Right.
It's not about blame. It's not about fault with Summer, you know, or Rose at all. It's just that these situations, you know, it opens them up.
Right.
To something bad happening, and something bad did happen to them. Almost 12 years to the day after Rose's disappearance, her niece, whom she never met, Summer Wells, went missing, also with nearly no physical evidence. And like her aunt, she remains missing. But her story has led to Rose's story getting out to more people. And we can only hope that it will also lead to answers in these 2 tragedies. Rose Marie Bly has been missing from St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin since August 21st, 2009. Rose is a white female with light brown hair and brown eyes. She has a tattoo of red cherries on the outside of her right ankle, and her ears and her belly button are pierced. At the time of her disappearance, her hair was cut in a chin-length bob. She may color her hair blonde or red. Rose was 21 when she went missing. She would be 34 today. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Rose Marie Bly, please contact the Polk County Sheriff's Office at 715-485-8300. You can see all of the sources for this episode along with photos and videos at our website, andthentheyweregone.com.
And be sure to follow us on social, And Then They Were Gone Pod on Facebook and at ATTWG Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It will help new listeners find us. And the more people that listen, the more chances we have of bringing someone home.
And we'll see you here next week for a brand new episode.
See you next week.
And Then They Were Gone is hosted by Kona Gallagher and Ethan Flick. All research, writing, and editing is done by Kona Gallagher. Theme music is The Stork by Ketsa. Additional music is provided by Kai Engel. And Then They Were Gone is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!
And cats, they're not usually known for their love of swimming, but one feline in Northern Virginia is hitting the water instead of the gym in an effort to lose weight. Holly is a 13-year-old cat who dislikes the outdoors and other physical activities, but with encouragement from her owner and weekly visits to the Old Town Pet Resort. Holly has managed to lose 1 pound in 6 weeks. Stay with us, everybody. We've got a lot more to come.